I got my new bolt made. I thought today I'd start rubbing my tank down and getting it ready for spraying. Started off with just some warm water and gave it all a good rub down. I managed to buy a multi-pack of wet and dry sandpaper off Amazon for about £7. They're the perfect like shape and length, they're not like a full sheet or anything, and you get 3 of each, which is plenty, from 160 grit up to 5,000 grit. Which is really good for polishing up things like aluminium, getting all the fine scratches out and stuff. As you can see, this was the first attempt at trying to fill the dent on one side of the tank. Obviously it's like 30 years old, this bike, so it's going to have some dents, but this is when I started to fill it 3 or 4 years ago. But I thought this time I'd try and make it a bit better, because you can still see kind of where the dent was. I'm just making sure to give it a really good key and a good rub back to make sure that all the rust is gone. I just use brakes cleaner on a cloth, and it's very good at getting rid of oil and residue, and it also doesn't affect the paint. This is what I always use as sort of a paint prep, and it always works, never have any fish eyes or anything like that, and it's really cheap, which is good, because some of this expensive, you know, anti-oil and painting prep stuff, it's very expensive, but a brake cleaner has always worked for me perfectly fine. I'm just going at this now, I think it's 220 grit, trying to give it a good key, ready to be refilled again. Now it looks really good. looks like it'll adhere some filler to it, I start mixing the filler. I got this stuff, it's called Big Boy Filler, something like that, I don't know, it was £8, and it's body filler, so, you know, good stuff. You just start by mixing. It's usually golf ball to a pea, as everybody knows, and just make sure that you mix it in really well, so you can't see any like obvious red hardener streaks in it. Make sure you mix it up really well. And then I just apply it, putting a bit of force on to make sure that it gets into the little nooks and crannies and stuff of the original filler and bits of the tank, but also making sure that you don't put bucket loads on, because then you've obviously got to sand it all back off. And then I'm just using some 220 grit dry, once it had dried, to sand it back. The good thing is to use something like 220 grit to get rid of the majority of it, and then use something like 400s to get a more smooth finish. Here I'm just going over with some 600s. Now I can feel that there's no, we used to call it mapping out, because it feels like looks like a map sort of thing, and you can feel it like a country on a map. And when you can't feel the edges anymore, that generally means that you've got it somewhere like. So using 600 grits now just to smooth it down and get it as flat as possible. I am by no means any body or painting expert. I've done some motorbikes, some old BSA things, some old aerials, Triumphs, things like that. Mainly the oil tanks and toolboxes and petrol tanks, frames, wheels, stuff like that. But I'm by no means at all any good at it. I just try and do it to the best of my ability, I suppose. So I'm just prepping now, wiping down with brake cleaner again, ready to give it some primer. This is just a test coat. As you can see underneath, I've not done the underneath or anything like that. I just wanted to see how close I was with the filler. And the easiest way to do that is to put a single coat of primer on. And then you can see whether it's still mapping out. You can still see the outline of the filler. And it wasn't too bad, but I wanted to do it again to make sure that I got them all. And as you can see later on, I do find a couple more tiny dents by the time the tank is silver. This is once I'd rubbed it down again. Off camera I gave it 3 or 4 coats of primer. So, and then I rubbed it down again and then started to paint it silver. Still don't know whether I'm going to go with silver. I might do. I might go gunmetal metallic grey. But it was at this point, by the time this first coat had dried, that I noticed the reflections of the dents. For some reason my camera has now decided to interfere with the LED lights I've got in my workshop. Don't know why. Never done that before. Something to do with the refresh rate, I think. So I'm just going over now, marking where I can see the refraction from the dents in the tank, and there's 3 ones that are fairly noticeable. The big dents is still slightly noticeable. There's not much I can do about that because the actual tank shape had changed, and I'm nowhere near skilled enough to go filling it up, rubbing it all down and filling it and rubbing it down again until I can get the exact contour of the tank back. But it won't look too bad when it's finished, as long as these little dents are filled. So I filled it and waited for it to dry, and then went at it with some 220 grit until I couldn't feel the edges of the filler anymore. then I went over the whole thing again with 400 grit, I believe, and then gave it all a good key for another priming. Quite a fiddly job this, because they were relatively deep dents, you could see them, and then getting them nice and smooth and flat, it's difficult. I don't have like a posh DA sander or anything like that, just do it by hand. I'll make sure in between that it's completely dry, the heater's on it, and it's left for a good hour at a time. But until I'm happy with the dents, obviously I don't want to give it a final coat. And then I just go over it with the primer again and hopefully watch the dents disappear. But until you get that actual silver coat on that first coat, you can't really see the reflections or the refractions of where you've filled it. It's only when the silver's on does it really stand out, which is when you've got to go back over and start sanding and filling again. But just from the primer going on now, it does look a lot better. Even I'm not happy with that. You can still see where the dent was. I think I am going to fill it again and sand it back and see whether I can just get it to look a bit better. I'm not very good at that at all. It's right where the curve of the tank is and the seam down the tank, and getting that right by hand is going to be a nightmare. I'm just not good at that sort of thing. I can fill dents and make stuff look good, but that was a really big dent where it had been dropped. But I'll give it another go, I suppose. I'm just going over the whole tank now with some 600s, trying to give it a key and rubbing down any little bits that look bad. And then it goes up for silver spraying after it's had another coat of primer. Just give it a very light coat of silver, that's all you need. Then I'll be able to see where any marks or dents are still. This side of the tank looks really good now. But when you get to this side of the tank, it's a lot more obvious when the silver goes on, where the original dent was, the big one. So I decided to rub it down again, try and get it nice and flat. Got it all the way back to the original filler. once I was happy with it, I gave it another coat of filler. And while that was drying, I decided to give my top yoke a coat of primer. Rather than polishing it up and everything, I've just decided to spray it black. I think it'll look good against the silver. I decided to have a trip to Halfords, having a look at what paint they got, and I finally settled on some BMW Mineral Grey. It's a gunmetal grey metallic, which I think will look good, and also some petrol resistant lacquer, because the last thing you want is to go to fill your tank up, spill a bit of petrol, and all of a sudden your paint starts coming off. So I gave the tank a final rub down once the filler had dried with some 600 grit. Got it nice and smooth and ready for a coat of paint. I also gave the top yoke a coat of black. This is going to have 3 or 4 coats of black. And now the coat of silver paint, my new stuff. It is coming out a bit strange. I think that's because the can's freezing cold and it's not been shook up enough. But once I've rubbed this first coat down with some 800 grit, it should look pretty good once it's had 3 or 4 coats. So after it had been rubbed down again with some 800 grit, I gave it a second coat, and this is how it looks. After it's been rubbed down and painted and rubbed down and painted again, I can finally give the tank a clear coat, and it looks a damn sight better than it did. Thank you very much for watching.